Perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, sea, conditioned things as such. Through these merits may all sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the ways of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you.
It seems like we opened the wrong link earlier, and now this is the correct link.
Okay.
We have 3 people along with Alice.
Okay, great. You know, technology always, it works eventually. So thank you everyone for coming. Been a little bit of a break from our regular schedule, so I know it's a shock. I'm very happy from my side to be back. And just as a little catch up, I know that we were all away for exams, and I can say that they went well for me and for Gache. And I don't know about Kadala, but I assume they went well. I haven't asked him, so everyone can rest assured that we passed another year. You know. Well, you say that, but then when your name gets called to do a debate exam, you always wonder just a little bit. So the exams went well, and we're back for another full month of teachings. 4 weeks in a row, we'll be here. Myself this week, next week, Venerable Kadala. The week after that, Venerable Gacha will be here in person. Right now, the schedule says online, but it's going to be in person. Then I'll be here the week after that in person, so 4 weeks in a row. And then the schedule gets a little bit fluffy again, but we'll figure it out as we go along. So our class for today is we're continuing our discussion of Lojong, and we're continuing our discussion of the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland by Atisha. Now, I have to say, the best intentions, right? The request had been to teach the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, right? And that was the plan, teach the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, right? Which is a really wonderful Lojong text by Dharma. He gave this teaching directly to Atisha. Then when Atisha came to Tibet, he gave it to Dromtonpa, and he and Dromtonpa together translated it into Tibetan. But this is about 120 verses or so. And so the thought was, before our break, we only had 3 weeks. So our thought was, we'll do a shorter Lojong text for those 3 weeks. That way we won't have anything unfinished over the break. And then we'll do Wheel of Sharp Weapons when we come back. But we didn't finish the shorter text. We only got through 15 verses. So we didn't finish that. So now we'll probably finish it today. We'll see. The ending part isn't as detailed. And so then maybe we'll start Wheel of Sharp Weapons next week. It's very unlikely we'll finish it in 3 weeks, but that's okay, There are a lot of teachings you go to where even if they finish the teaching, they'll start a new teaching, or they'll start right back at the beginning just to give a little bit that you leave it unfinished. And that creates the conditions for the students and the teachers to come together again. So we'll just say that was the plan all along, you know? I think the beauty of Lojong, right? So Lojong, or mind training, is a type of meditative practice and technology, a way of studying that focuses everything, all of the teachings, it brings it to a single point, which is looking at the self-cherishing mind and how to get rid of the self-cherishing mind. Right? And so the Lojong teachings, the mind training teachings, contain all of the teachings of the Buddha, right? It's not a special subset of teachings. It is all of the teachings of the Buddha that are taught in such a way to really point at the self-cherishing mind. So it isn't a different set of teachings. It's just a way of engaging with those teachings and a way of meditating on those teachings with a very strong focus, recognizing that the self-cherishing mind, we say, is the cause of all of our suffering. Now, of course, we know that the cause of suffering, the root of samsara, is the self-grasping mind, right? The mind that grasps at true existence. But very shortly after that is the self-cherishing mind, the mind that says, my happiness is more important than your happiness. That comes directly from, when we say the self-grasping, there's two types of self-grasping, right? There's grasping at the self of phenomena, grasping at the self of persons. And the only difference between those two types of self-grasping is the object, right? And this is in the Prasangika system, the actual highest view that we believe in, right? So when I grasp the true existence of this cup, then that is the grasping at the true existence of phenomena. When you grasp the true existence of a self, of a person, or of me or mine, then that is grasping at the true existence of the self, right? Self-grasping of a person. Now, usually we use a cup, for example, often, because in all of our texts, they often refer to a bumpa as like the main example for a lot of things. Bumpa is like a pot, like a gatam, like they carry water in. So we often refer to a cup. But really, when you're looking at self-grasping, the grasping at the self of phenomena, what you really use as the example is the five aggregates upon which a self is imputed, right? So it's like looking at the body or looking at the consciousness and saying that is a self, right? Or saying that truly exists. So that's the heart of the grasping at self of phenomena. But really, it's anything that isn't a person or the idea of mine, me or mine, is grasping at self of phenomena. But the more important one isn't grasping at the self of a pot or a cup. Isn't that important? I mean, it is. But the real thing is grasping at the self of the five aggregates as if they were a self and as if they truly existed as a self, right? But so grasping at the self of persons, this idea of me, the idea of mine, immediately following after that is the idea that my happiness is more important than yours, right? So the teachings say that the root of samsara is grasping at true existence, but the cause of all suffering is grasping at self-cherishing. And so the mind training teachings are designed to uproot that self-cherishing, to say that all of your self-cherishing comes from grasping at the self, and all it does is cause you suffering. And how does it cause you suffering? And then how can you look at all of the other teachings of the Buddha, all of the teachings of the Lamrim, all of the different types of meditative and intellectual understandings that we're taught? How can you rearrange them in your mind to realize how they relate to self-grasping so they all work together, right? The idea is that all these teachings are always working in concert with one another. They're never battling one another. So for me, personally, I really appreciate mind training techniques. And that's because I'm such a selfish person and I have such a big ego that the reminder, I say that jokingly, but not jokingly. Like it's true, right? We are selfish people. We don't mean to be. And we all, as practitioners, have done a lot of work, but the natural state of a samsaric being is focusing on yourself, right? That's the natural state of being in samsara. And so to break yourself of that habit can be very difficult, And what the mind training teachings really help you do, or the techniques, is really study your intentions. Really study what it is that has caused me to engage in any of the behaviors that you're engaging in, both mental behaviors and physical behaviors. Are you really doing this for the purpose of benefiting others, or are you feeding your own ego, right? That's where we get into the discussion of the 8 worldly concerns, which we've talked about quite often. We could talk about them again if they come up, right? But so the 8 worldly concerns being like the generals that are guided by the self-cherishing mind, right? The minds that seek out your own pleasure, seek out your own gain, your own profit, these kind of things. So for me, mind training is a very powerful practice because it gets right at the core of how I live every day. It's not just an intellectual practice. It's something I can actually bring into my everyday life without any, I don't have to do any kind of like gymnastics to make it make sense into what I'm doing every day, right? Sometimes some of these teachings, they seem a little bit removed from our everyday life, or it may be easy to bring them into our meditation practice, but then to bring them into off the cushion, sometimes it involves like an extra step, right? We have to translate these teachings into something that we can engage with in the world. But for me, at least, mind training gets there directly. There isn't the same intermediary. So for me, that's why it's really powerful. I'm glad we have a chance to do more discussion on them here. Now, in our text, so the Bodhisattva Jewel Garland by Atisha. So we already went over this in earlier sessions, but it's worth reviewing. This is one of the earliest mind training texts we have. Now, earlier than this, the 2 texts that we have that are really earlier than this are texts by Dhammarakshita, the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and also Peacock in the Poison Grove. And we get those through Atisha. They were taught to Atisha, and he brought them to Tibet. Right? There aren't many other texts that are earlier than that. And so Atisha's text, if we have, there's a text called The Great Collection of Mind Training that I've talked about that has a lot of different mind training texts combined. And really, aside from those 2, the oldest ones come from Atisha, and it's from the Kadampa Geshes that are really promoting this lineage of teaching. But if you look in the book of Kadam, which is largely teachings between Atisha and Drom Tompa, his chief disciple, the first long text in that, it's called the Father Teachings, the Jewel Garland of Dialogues, is essentially a commentary on this text, but it's structured as a conversation between Drom Tompa and Atisha. And they have this extended conversation. And at the end of each chapter, Drom Tompa says, so if I were to summarize everything you just said, and then he'll recite like one verse of this. And so that very long text is an explanation of this. And in that, Atisha gives lots of quotes from other Indian sources that are mind training in flavor. You know what I mean? So there are Indian sources that have a similar idea of what we call mind training now, but we don't really have many texts from there. We just have quotes here and there. So this text is it's a very simple approach to mind training. It doesn't contain all of the more kind of really harsh mind training teachings that you get sometimes that are really looking at the ego and poking it with a pin to make sure you pop. It's not like that. But what it's really focusing on are what are called the 7 innermost jewels of a Arya being, right? And we discussed this in the first teaching because we covered it earlier, but we're going to discuss it again at the end because it's explicit in one of the last chapters, in one of the last verses, rather. The 7 types of wealth, or the 7 types of jewel of an Arya in chapter 25. That is made explicit. So this is really structured around those 7, right? So it isn't quite as harsh as some of the mind training teachings can be. It's also worth noting that all of the Tonglen practice we have, the giving and taking, comes from the mind training tradition, right? So we think of mind training as taking the suffering of others and giving them happiness. But what you do with that suffering, you take that suffering to destroy your own self-cherishing mind, right? When you really look at the practice, that's how it's often described to us. So it really comes from this mind training practice. So in the previous classes, I think we covered through chapter 15. And so very briefly review up and through verse 15. There were discussions about renunciation and compassion, as well as the self-cherishing mind, karma and its results, and the 8 worldly concerns were all topics that were discussed in the first 15 verses. Those are kind of the perennial topics that come up again and again. So they'll come up again, but I won't go into them now. But just if you have questions about those things, so the self-cherishing mind, compassion, renunciation, karma and its results, and the 8 worldly concerns, you can ask those questions at the end. They were discussed in earlier sessions, though. So starting with verse 16, verse 16 goes, dwell utterly in solitude beyond the town limits, like the carcass of a wild animal. Hide yourself away in the forest and live free of attachment. Right? Now, in the commentary, this is discussed as the hidden conduct of the practitioner. And what it means by the hidden conduct is not that it's secret, but it's the conduct that you do away from others for your own mind. And it's really a strong part of this is about developing renunciation and getting rid of attachment to this life and getting rid of worldly attachments. It's worth noting that when you study calm abiding meditation, so this comes up most often when you're studying Lamrim and you get to the fifth chapter, or the fifth of the five paramitas, the paramita of concentration, you're given instruction on how to develop a single-pointed concentration. And the first step is abandon your homeland. That's the first step to achieve single-pointed concentration. Not because there's anything wrong with your homeland or your friends and your family, except that they are the sources of your habitual attachment and anger. And if you're trying to dedicate yourself to a meditative practice, having those obstacles is very difficult, right? So the goal of our practice is that we can live in the middle of the busiest city and have a calm mind, single-pointed concentration, no problem. But until you're able to develop it, you need to create as conducive conditions as possible. And so that's very similar here. It's saying you should dwell in solitude, right, beyond the town limits, because the town limits are where, within the town, is where all of your habitual tendencies come from. Everything you've done so far, all of your, your relation to the worldly life comes from the town. And so because of that, you try to get out of that. Now here, the next couple lines, like the carcass of a wild animal, hide yourself away in the forest. What this reminds me of is the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampa, which we discussed in our first class. Do you remember the 10 innermost jewels of the Kadampa? Anyone online remember? So that's okay. That's okay. So the 10 innermost jewels, we won't go over them all in detail here, but the first four are what are called the four entrustments. And so the first is you entrust your mind to, or you trust your innermost mind to the Dharma. Right? And this means you turn away from worldly delights. And then you entrust the innermost Dharma to the beggar, which means you discard your attachment to possessions and to status by entrusting your mind to the beggar. And then you entrust the innermost beggar to death. What that means is you are willing to bear hardship joyfully in the pursuit of Dharma practice. Right? Doesn't mean you go and you seek out hardship, but when it comes, you bear it joyfully with delighted mind as part of your practice without any frustration. And then, so you entrust your mind to the Dharma, Dharma to the beggar, beggar to death, and then death to the cave. And what this means is you're willing to practice alone, without support, without help, without loved ones around, recognizing that sometimes the pursuit of Dharma practice is a lonely practice because it can be difficult. And the example they give is like an animal that is dying goes and finds a dry cave so it can die on its own. We have to be willing in our practice to have such a commitment and dedication to practice that we'd be willing to do that. And the reason, especially in the Tibetan and Indian tradition, is that at the time of death, you usually have attendants who are taking care of you, who are reciting rites, who are doing all these things to prepare your body and all these things. And you're saying here that my commitment to my practice is such that I don't need those things. Not to say that we're not shunning them. We're not saying that they're useless. We're saying that my commitment is more important. And if it means that I'm by myself, away from everyone, and I don't have anyone to offer last rites to me, and so forth, that is okay. I'm willing to commit myself to that level. And so in this verse, when he says, dwell utterly in solitude, and like the carcass of a wild animal, hide yourself away in the forest, live free of attachment. What it's saying is, don't be dispirited by having few things. Don't be dispirited by being alone. Right? These things are all treasures. The less you have, it gives you more opportunity to practice. Being alone, we think of being alone quite often as so difficult, right, in our everyday life. And now with the internet, we're never alone. We carry billions of people with us in our pocket on our mobile phones. And yet we're probably lonelier than ever before. So the idea of being in the proximity of others has nothing to do with our loneliness of mind, right? And so here what this is saying is, it's not saying you should be lonely. It's saying that your loneliness is due to your attachment, right? It isn't due to being near other people or being away from other people. It's due to the way you relate to other people is through the lens of attachment, through the lens of expecting things from other people, right? Not an open-hearted love and compassion, wishing for them to be happy, but expecting something in return. Not on purpose and not explicitly. That's our implicit relationship, right? And our loneliness comes when we don't get those things. There is a dangerous appeal to worldly life. The best practitioners don't have to go out to the forests. They don't have to go to the caves. They don't have to go to the mountains because they have overcome their attachment to worldly life. But for those of us who haven't done that, there's a very dangerous appeal to the worldly life. What is sometimes called the perfections of samsara, which is like an oxymoron, right? And so what's important for me in this verse and in these kind of teachings is the reminder that not that I'm a bad person for being attracted to samsara, but that it's natural, that this is the natural state of being a samsaric being. And so by recognizing it, then I can do something about it. But it's no judgment. It's not saying, how dare you seek out other people for happiness? How dare you seek out nice things, nice food, good clothing, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that at all, right? There's no judgment here. It's just a recognition. You're a samsaric being. These are the habits of samsaric beings. But the truth is, these are the habits that keep you in samsara. And so once you recognize that, then you can slowly start to undo those habits. So it's not a matter of judgment. It's a matter of recognition and then slowly undoing the habits that you've created since beginning this time. So for me, I look at these kind of admonitions in a positive light because it's helping me see something I wasn't aware of before. There is, in the commentary on this verse, there's a great back and forth between Trungpa and Atisha. Trungpa says, Master, what is the greatest service to one's teacher? And Atisha says, the most excellent service is to make everything one does a Dharma practice. Master, are not gifts of offerings and ministrations better? Atisha, even lay people can perform these things. Master, would then it be okay if one does not offer those at all? Atisha says, it would then be an obvious sign of having no respect. So for me, what I like about that back and forth is that it shows you have to balance. What's most important is our Dharma practice. If you want to make real offerings to your teachers, you practice Dharma. Making offerings, and here it says even lay people can make those. I know that most people that are here are lay people, but even those who aren't engaging in spiritual practice at all can make an offering of money or of service, right? How many wealthy business people make offerings to get what they want, right? Those aren't real offerings. And even if they are made in good faith, they're very easy. For those of us that have any sort of means, to make an offering of those means isn't difficult. Doesn't really require any effort on our part. But making an offering a practice, that takes effort. Now, that doesn't mean don't make offerings of physical offerings, because that just seems disrespectful to your teachers. So a teacher says you have to find this balance where, yes, you have to make, or it's important to make offerings of physical things and administration. So here, what's translated administration means like service of some sort, right? That's important. If you have the means to make those kind of offerings of service and of material goods, you should be making those because those are signs of respect to your teacher, signs of respect to the Dharma. And those signs of respect aren't for your teacher's benefit, but for your own benefit and for other students' benefit, right? But more important than that is engaging in Dharma practice and make that your real offering. And so when you think of abandoning everything, the willingness to go to nowhere, to abandon all worldly life and go to a cave, that's the best offering you can make to your teacher, right? And so Atisha is reminding us we have to find a balance depending on our circumstances of how we serve our teachers and how we serve the Dharma. There's another section in there where Trungpa asks Atisha, there are some disciples who ask for teachings that are most powerful at the moment of death because that's what they think is most important. And Atisha says, any student who's only looking for those teachings is pitiable because you never know when death is going to come. You should be preparing for it right now. This moment right now is the moment you need to be practicing. If you put all your hopes on having the right kind of practice at the moment of death, who knows what's going to happen, right? And there are very powerful practices we talk about that we can do where we know death is approaching, right? Those exist. But if you're putting your faith in those, you're missing the point because you don't know when it's going to happen. You have to do the work now, right? So those are pitiable students who only focus on those practices, he says. So that what that means is we have to forsake sloth, mental dullness, laziness. And that leads into the next verses. And he says, your practice has to be free from sloth, mental dullness, from laziness. It has to be free from being put off until tomorrow. Okay. And so the next verse says, verse 17, always remain firm in your commitment. When a hint of procrastination and laziness arises, at that instant, enumerate your flaws and recall the essence of spiritual conduct. So here, when we say your commitment, this is the commitment to free all sentient beings from suffering, and to recognize that in order to do that, you have to become a Buddha first. So therefore, you must develop a mind of bodhicitta. And with that bodhicitta intention, you must develop a mind of perfect renunciation that looks at your self-cherishing mind and realizes it does nothing but keep you trapped in samsara. So with a bodhicitta motivation, you destroy your self-cherishing mind. That is your commitment, right? So you always remain firm in that. Everything you do has to be rooted in the motivation to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And with that in mind, to make sure your self-cherishing mind is not the one steering the ship, you know? Atisha says there are 100 different rivers that converge under a single bridge. It'd be so difficult to cross all of those 100 rivers individually. Therefore, why would you not cross this bridge when it is here in front of you? It is vital that we cross this bridge at this very moment. And that bridge is destroying the self-cherishing mind. So we say that the 100 rivers or streams are the many different aspects of our Dharma practice that we have to do, all the many obstacles we have, all the many realizations we want to achieve. In order to achieve any of them, we need to get rid of the self-cherishing mind. So that is like a bridge that crosses all of the rivers of practice. And here, when he says, it's interesting, when a hint of procrastination arises or laziness, what is the antidote here? So in general, we say the antidote to laziness is joyful effort, right? And joyful effort, sundru, is generating joy. It's very similar to rejoicing, actually, and it's finding joy in virtue, right? That's what it's related to when we talk about joyful effort as one of the paramitas. But here he's saying the antidote is to enumerate your flaws. And so when you notice you're being lazy, when you combine that practice with mind training, the way to overcome it is to notice, what am I doing wrong? Right? Again, this isn't about getting on a guilt trip to sound a bad person, but it's saying, wait, I'm doing something wrong. If I have this mind of laziness, if I have these things that are obstacles to my practice, that's coming from my side, right? It's not coming from the outside. No matter the outside circumstances, the obstacles are always going to be internal. The external obstacles exist, but they're very minor in the big picture, right? So by enumerating your flaws, you're reminding yourself that these are all things I'm doing incorrectly, but because of that, there are things I can change. Right? That's the beauty of it. So this is where the mind training practice comes in, is that my essential practice is bodhicitta and cherishing others more than myself, getting rid of the self-cherishing mind. That is the last line. The essence of spiritual conduct is renunciation, getting rid of the self-cherishing mind, cherishing others more than myself, bodhicitta. And in order to get to that, I have to look at all the things I'm doing that aren't in line with that goal. Eliminating self-grasping is everything, right? For me, what I like, this feels like to me, and it's easy for it not to be this way, but for me, when I think of recalling all of my flaws, especially in relation to self-grasping, it doesn't feel like I'm being criticized. It feels like an opportunity for growth. Right? It feels like an opportunity to realize how I can find happiness in this life and how I can be of service to others. It's not a chastisement, right? It's not someone knocking me across the ears saying bad boy. Okay. It's saying this is what it means to be a samsaric being, but this is how to be free from samsara. And you just don't realize that you're doing it backwards because you've done it backwards for so long. So it's like the same message being repeated over and over again, right? In the mind training teachings, you hear one of the verses is put all blames on a single point. And you hear that over and over and over again. Return all blames to a single point. That single point is the self-cherishing mind, right? And so, but it gets repeated over and over again. And sometimes if you just read these verses or you read these texts, it can seem repetitive because there's only a handful of points that are made. They're made in different ways and they bring in different explanations and different ideas, but it's only a handful of points and they all come down to how to get rid of the self-cherishing mind. But the reason it's repeated so often is because it's important. And the reason it's repeated in different ways is because not all of us are going to find the same path to get there. So if you can have that same teaching, that same understanding, but you might different ways to get there, then depending on where you are in your life, one way might click and others may be like throwing rice to the wall, right? So it's worth doing it over and over again. And even for me, I've had moments where I've studied the same prayer or the same teaching over and over again, and then all of a sudden it makes sense in a way it didn't make sense. This is true both in my practice and also just in like my academic studies. When I'm studying something for debate, to be fair, I'm also studying it in Tibetan, so I'm struggling with translation as I go. But I'll be reading something over and over again. I know what it means, but there'd be something missing. And how I get to knowing the meaning of the topic and then getting to that thing that's missing is just doing it over and over and over again. There's a new monk who I give advice to every week or so. He comes to my house to get instruction, and he was like, "How do I get through this?" And I said, "You have to keep doing it, and you bring it into your practice. You bring your study into your meditation practice." And then, yes, we have to fight with translation. That's part of it. But even when you're studying something in your own language, there's still a type of translation happening, right? And I know English may not be the first language for anyone else in this room besides me, but you're fluent enough with it that it doesn't create a language barrier. But the ideas still need translation because they're ideas that we haven't grown up with. So there's still a matter of translation. So I don't mind things being repeated. And that's good because if I did, it would be a very frustrating business to be in, this whole Tibetan Buddhism thing. We have to be firm in our commitment to abandon our self-cherishing mind. And we have to ask ourselves, why am I delaying? That is the big question. We have to ask ourselves, whenever, I think often of people that are, they're trying, let's say you're on a diet, but you have a cheat day every day. Okay. And the idea of having a cheat day for something like that is that you know that what you're doing is difficult. So you give yourself an out a little bit so that to try to create a balance. So you can always be moving forward. That's the idea. I don't know if it works that way, but that's the idea, right? We see similar things with the Dharma practice. Once you start practicing for a while, then you might go to do something and you say, "Oh, I know this isn't probably the right thing to do, but just this one time I'm going to do it." Right? How many times do you have that? Right? Or even just like even simple things like knowing, "Oh, I really shouldn't go have the second drink when I'm out with my friends, but just this one time, tomorrow I'll have a headache, but that's okay," right? We do those things all the time. And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes there are other things at play, like if you're with friends and family, sometimes doing that also creates deeper relationships with friends and family. So it's not always black and white, right? But why are we delaying in our practice? That's the question. What is holding us back? Especially when we know what the Dharma is. When we have some conviction, having been around great teachers and having studied the text ourselves and seeing the way that the study and practice of the Dharma has resulted in these amazing teachers that we have as our examples, such as this one is Dalai Lama, such as other teachers we've met in our lives. We know that the way they exist in the world comes from their practice of Dharma. We have an understanding of the Dharma, and yet we resist it. So it's worth looking at, why am I resisting? Why am I delaying? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, why do we resist? At least what I experience is it's scary. Letting go the self-cherishing mind is a scary prospect because without that, who am I? Without all these trappings of my ego, who am I? Will I not exist?
Yeah.
So, and I think it's such a conditioned concept that having to just disband all that, feels like, oh my God, who will I be if all this goes away?
That's true. But at the same time, that's why the teachings, we don't have to do everything or nothing, right? And so when you have that fear that this is so different than what I'm used to, then it's okay. How can I take baby steps? How can I start at the shallow end of the pool, right? And what are small things I can do? And when I have that moment where I say, oh, I know this isn't probably the right thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why am I going to do it anyway? Right. But I agree, it can be very scary. They say in the mind training teachings, it explicitly says, if you follow these teachings all the way, worldly people will look at you like a crazy person. You'll appear to be a madman. By abandoning worldly dharma, you appear crazy to worldly people because their lives are centered around all the things that you're saying are creating suffering, right? So with that in mind, of course it's difficult to get rid of those things because you're so accustomed to them. And we've defined ourselves by those things quite often, right? So that's a good answer, but it's also the same, okay, I'm afraid of it, or that fear comes up. So then what can I do to do a slow transition into it? What are the areas in my life where I can get rid of this grasping? And the easiest way for me is to notice those areas where they're causing me immediate suffering. Because when you do a little bit of practice, a little bit of study, a little bit of meditation, you can see I cause my own suffering, my mental suffering in this circumstance. And it's because I had these expectations that are due to my self-cherishing mind, right? And so when you notice that, getting rid of that is very easy, right? Because you don't want that experience of suffering. And then that segues into the more subtle types of suffering that you don't quite grasp onto as suffering, And then eventually the practice becomes more natural. I think that, the beauty of the Dharma is that it all works together, So here, when we talk about, recall the essence of spiritual conduct, it really is bodhicitta. But then with bodhicitta, you have the idea of karma and its results. So when you really have a strong understanding of karma and its results and conviction that it is accurate, you won't ever want to engage in non-virtue because you'll have the realization or the recognition that everything I do now is going to affect my future rebirths, right? It may affect me in this life, but more likely it's going to affect my future rebirths. And so why would I want to create conditions or make it more difficult for me in the future? And so having a strong conviction in karma and the results of karma automatically lead to avoidance of non-virtuous behavior. And in the same way, having an understanding of emptiness. Now, I know emptiness feels really scary and difficult, but having a small understanding of emptiness, just the understanding that the way things appear to us is not the way they truly exist. That's the easiest understanding at our very, simplistic level. Having that understanding, that reduces our grasping at me and mine. Because the way I experience myself isn't the way I truly exist. Right? If we can just have that simple understanding of the emptiness of persons, then that reduces our self-cherishing mind. Because you realize this I, this me, this Lekden that I'm cherishing so much doesn't exist in the way I perceive it to exist. And so when I can have even a baby understanding of that, it becomes easier to let go of it. Right? And so they work together. So by getting rid of the self-cherishing mind, it makes it easier to understand the things that they don't exist the way I always thought they existed. Because if the Lekden that I'm holding on to as truly existing really existed in that way, then the self-cherishing mind would make sense. If we truly existed in the way that our hallucinatory minds make us out to truly exist, then self-cherishing makes sense. It would be a logical thing to do. But instead, we see self-cherishing causes suffering. Therefore, we recognize that the self-grasping mind can't be accurate. And so understanding one helps you get rid of the other. And in the same way, understanding cause and effect, understanding karma helps you avoid negative actions. They all work together. And so when I feel myself resistant to practice because I'm attracted to the delights of samsara, I then try to, when I'm aware of it, usually I'm not aware of it until after I've already gone and engaged in the delights of samsara for too long. For me, that usually means like reading a book instead of studying or something. One more chapter, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, 3 a.m. How did one chapter end up this way? Oh well, so much for my evening practice. I think I need to clarify when I say I'm engaging in the delights of samsara as a monk. I want to clarify what that means to me. Okay, it's not the same thing as the delights of samsara that other people might be engaging in due to our different circumstances. So just put that on the record. But for me, when I'm aware of it, when I'm not caught up in it, when I am able to realize, wait a second, even if it is scary, then I say, okay, well, what are the things I know I can do right now to help break me out of this rut? What are the things I've done in the past? What are practices I've done? What are texts I've studied? What are meditations I've done that have helped me overcome something right now? And it may not be directly related, but at least it's tangential and it helps break me out of my pattern, you know? Because all the teachings come to the same thing. All the teachings work together. So if it's really hard to face the idea of, we talked about the 8 worldly concerns, we don't want to have any actions that are motivated by seeking out pleasure, seeking out profit, seeking out praise, or seeking out fame, or trying to avoid loss, trying to avoid discomfort, trying to avoid criticism, and trying to avoid infamy. We want those 8 things to not be our motivations for anything. Maybe it may be very difficult to have the first 2, the idea of pleasure and discomfort. So a mind seeking out pleasure and a mind trying to avoid discomfort. It's really hard for us to abandon those things because we're so conditioned to it. So when I notice that come up, maybe I can't abandon that right away, but I can abandon one of the other ones, or I can do something that is parallel to it, right? So at least recognizing that what our actions are doing is leading us into deeper suffering, and try to find a way, if we can't face it directly, how can we face it from the back? How can we go around it? So having all these different things at our disposal are useful. That's why having this multi-pronged approach to the Dharma is a useful practice, which is why remembering that mind training as a technique, as a meditation style, as a study modality includes all of the teachings of the Buddha. It's reorganizing them, repackaging them in a way that's pointed in a specific direction. Okay, so then the next next 3 verses all go together, and these are verses 18 through 20, and these are how we can help benefit others' minds. Right, that's what it's talking about. So in our context, we just talked about how it's important for us to go away, right? Abandon the town, go to the middle of nowhere, try to be alone. And it says, however, if you do encounter others, speak peacefully and truthfully. Do not grimace or frown, but always maintain a smile. In general, when you see others, be free of miserliness and delight in giving. Relinquish all thoughts of envy. To help soothe others' minds, forsake all disputation and be endowed with forbearance. What I think is great about these is such like common sense, right? Mm-hmm. It's always nice when there's just like common sense teachings, like, oh, these make sense. But it's showing us that there is a balance between living in the world and living a spiritual life. That if your goal is, I want to go to the caves in the middle of nowhere and be myself, but you're going to see other people. Like, it's going to happen. So when you see other people, then what do? If you're saying, I can't be around anyone, I have to be by myself, then all of a sudden other people show up and your mind is thrown off, right? Because you haven't prepared for it. And so you notice that like all of a sudden you're more attached to being alone than you are actually engaging in the practice of renunciation. So here, it's a lot of different advice about how can you benefit others by being in their presence, even if that wasn't your goal. If you tried to be alone, you tried to go to the cave, what do you do? And speak peacefully and truthfully. So obviously, we never want to, lying is a negative action. It's one of the 10 non-virtues. It's always negative when you lie. So always speak truthfully, but speak peacefully. Speak peacefully means our goal is to not upset others' minds, right? When we talk about harsh speech, right, of the 4 types of non-virtues of speech, one of them is harsh speech, right? And harsh speech isn't the language you use. It is speech that is spoken with the intent to upset someone. Right? That's what it means by harsh speech. So you should always be speaking in peaceful ways, which can look different depending on the circumstances and the audience. But the goal is to always make others, this is the hard thing. And I don't know if it comes up in the next verse a little bit, but we're always told we should praise others. And when someone engages in harmful actions towards you, you should praise them. That should be your response, not criticize them, not defend yourself, but praise others. But in the next verse, we talk about empty praise and fickle superficial flattery is meaningless, both when it comes from others towards you and when you can give it towards others. So when we're told you should always smile at others, right? You should always be peaceful and friendly. You shouldn't be performing it. You should really generate a mind of happiness, saying, I want to make this person happy. And maybe all I can do right now is smile. Like that's the only thing I have. If I'm when I walk here from my hotel room, I don't talk to anyone on the street. So the only way I can do anything to interact with them is try to hold myself in a way that is friendly, right? And is trying to send out good vibes, whatever that may mean, right? That's all I can do if I'm not engaging in conversation. I'm not having these conversations. So that should be genuine, right? That's the important part of this. Do not grimace or frown, It's such simple advice. Atisha says, he says, you could be dead tonight. Why would you want to spend your last moments grimacing at someone? There's no guarantee that you're going to live till tomorrow. So why wouldn't you spend your last moments trying to make others happy, even if it's as simple as smiling at them? So I like that within this teaching that's focused on getting rid of the self-cherishing mind, it's saying you still have to live in the world. You still have to engage with others. So how can you engage with others in such a way to get rid of your self-cherishing mind? So then here it goes on, right? In general, when you see others, be free of miserliness, delight in giving. So this is related to, again, the 7 jewels of the Arya being. One of them is the wealth or the jewel of giving. It's also the first paramita, right? The Bodhisattva. Part of getting rid of your self-cherishing mind and part of developing a mind that cherishes others is more important than yourself is to get rid of thoughts of both envy and miserliness. And the easiest way to do that is for miserliness to actually make offerings to others. And envy is to celebrate others' victories, to rejoice in others' achievements, accomplishments, and the good times or whatever it may be. Right? So if you really try to have a mind that is always wishing to get rid of your own self-cherishing, then there wouldn't be any place for miserliness. And so being generous to others, always looking to help them, is a way to help get rid of that. Now, depending on your circumstances, there are different ways to be generous, right? It can be generous. We know when we study the paramitas, generosity, there's generally talk about 3 types of generosity, right? The generosity of material goods, generosity of Dharma, and the generosity of fearlessness. And so ultimately, the generosity of Dharma, sharing Dharma instruction and Dharma teachings, is the most beneficial. But all of those 3 types of generosity are useful. So depending on the circumstances, it's not saying give away all your possessions. But getting rid of miserliness isn't the same thing as getting rid of your possessions, right? So you shouldn't have any attachment to your possessions, or to your wealth, to whatever you may be. And then lastly, and relinquish all thoughts of envy, right? So if we have a mind that reminds us that everything is like a dream, everything is like an illusion, nothing exists the way we perceive it to exist, then why would we grasp at at signs of true existence as if they were real, and then wish them and allow them to cause us emotional distress, right? If we really are trying to benefit others, and we say that my goal is for others to be happy, how could we ever be envious of others? How could we have a mind that doesn't want them to have every single happiness in the world? And when others achieve things that even if we don't think they deserve them, right? When like your frenemy gets like a raise that you wanted and you don't think they deserve it, or your coworker gets a raise that you think you deserved, if you really want all sentient beings to be happy, how can you be unhappy that they've received something that makes them happy? Even if it's worldly happiness. This is the difficulty with some of these things, is that we want ultimate happiness, right? Worldly happiness, we say, is a type of suffering. If we grasp on a worldly happiness, we're always going to be unsatisfied. However, worldly happiness allows us to get through the day sometimes. And so we want others to experience worldly happiness. Even if that isn't the end all be all, we don't want everyone to experience only misery and suffering and then become Buddhists. We want them to experience joy, whatever that may look like. So when people receive things, even if they are receiving, they win the lottery, you're like, well, good for you, right? The lottery isn't really going to make you happy, but you think you're happy right now. So I'm going to rejoice in your happiness right now. And I'm going to hope that that happiness can actually be transformed into genuine happiness, even if I have my doubts, right? And if my frenemy gets this promotion that I wanted, I have to find a way to be happy for them, even if I don't think they deserve it, because this is something they wanted. Even if they were sneaky in the way they went about getting it, I can be I can have a mind that wishes they didn't do it in a deceitful way, because that's only causing them harm, right? But all that would be is a mind of compassion, a mind that realizes they've created suffering for themselves, right? So we have to find that balance of saying, I want permanent, ultimate happiness for all sentient beings. But I'm also recognizing that right now, I can give them immediate happiness. It's worldly, that is temporary, but it is better than nothing. And if that means I smile at them, if that means I make an offering, if that means I do these small acts of goodness and kindness, then I should try to embrace those as much as my circumstances allow. And so the teachings try to find that balance where we always have our mind on the big picture, right? The goal of Buddhahood, ultimate happiness, freedom from all suffering. But that doesn't mean we should give up on the small things. His Holiness has often, I've heard him openly criticized. There was a teaching at Yume, must have been about 12 years ago. I had just come to Sarah. And so there were a lot of monks there. And at some point he said, you know, it is shameful that all of us monks say our goal is to liberate all sentient beings, but we're going to do that to become Buddha. When we become Buddhists, that's how we're going to help others. And yet we look at our Christian brothers and sisters who have soup kitchens, who have homeless shelters, who have all these things, and we don't have those. That's shameful. And you used to use the excuse that that's worldly benefit only. That's an excuse. That's not genuine. Because this it's true, that is worldly benefit, but they're suffering. If you have the means to help eliminate their suffering in even a small way, you need to do it. So we have to find that benefit, that balance of worldly experience and ultimate experience. And the mind training teachings give space for that. And the benefit of it is that working in the here and now, working with the worldly, because that's what we have at our disposal most often, helps get rid of our self-cherishing mind. And by getting rid of our self-cherishing mind, we put our mental state into a place that is beyond the world. So we actually create a super mundane state of being of our mind by engaging in worldly activities in that way. And lastly, it says, forsake all disputation. So don't argue with others, basically. This is hard, especially when you're right and they're wrong. Right? It's important though. And so here it says, be endowed with forbearance. So forbearance meaning patience. Patience, right, is not becoming upset when you experience suffering, whether it be coarse physical suffering or someone else is engaging in harmful activity toward you. This is hard. Now, when you see others that are when you see people engaging in actions that are harming others, and you have a means to help stop them or help correct their behavior, then you should, right? Even if all they're doing is harming themselves. But you also have to be thoughtful and to say, can I actually intercede here in a way that is helpful? Or am I just trying to show off that I am like my self-righteousness, that I know better than that, you know? Sometimes intercession is possible and you're able to change people's minds or help direct them to a different path, things like that. But often you're not able to. And all that's going to happen is you're going to feel good about yourself, but it's not going to change anything. And they're just going to double down on their position. So you have to figure out you have to be skillful in the way you engage in these things, right? So here it's saying, forsake all disputation. Now, there is a place for disputation. There is a place for standing up for what you believe in when others are causing harm. But you have to find out a way to do it that is skillful and is meaningful and is imbued with both compassion and wisdom. So if you're arguing with someone, it should always come from a place of compassion. Wanting to eliminate the suffering of others, not wanting to show that you're right. Even if you're right and they're wrong. Which I hope, right? That should never be the point. Because all that does is feed your ego. That's the opposite of a mind training practice. I tell this story a lot, but I remember once when I was in Boston, we were studying the 37 practices of Bodhisattva by Geshe Zampo, which is another mind training text that combines mind training and long room teachings in 37 verses. And Geshe Nawantinle is the teacher. And one of our students was like, well, what if sometimes you really just have to sue someone because they do something wrong, so you have to sue them? He's like, what do you mean you have to sue them? And he's like, sometimes you just have to. And he's like, well, a bodhisattva wouldn't. He's like, I don't know what to tell you. Bodhisattva would not have to. He's like, maybe you have to sometimes, but bodhisattva would not. So this teaching is about trying to live your life as a bodhisattva. So try to find a bridge between those two things. But she was so convinced, sometimes when someone does something wrong, her mind was very this corporeal mindset that like they need to be punished, and this is like the situation. So like this is the way to do it. You have to get what you deserved. You were harmed. You deserve this thing. They deserve punishment. Therefore, you must do it. Right. And in a worldly sense, you can understand the logic of that, especially if you, I mean, depending on your belief about criminality and the prison system and these kind of things. But like you can understand like punishment for things that are done wrong, like at least on a big scale, like that makes sense to some extent. But for a bodhisattva, that isn't the goal, right? And if we're trying to live our lives like bodhisattvas, the goal isn't to punish someone. The goal is to help people not suffer. And so when someone engages in harmful behavior, we realize it's because they're suffering and they don't understand that what they're doing is causing more suffering. So instead of trying to punish them, we try to relieve them of their suffering in any way we can. And usually it's not punishing them doesn't help relieve them of their suffering, right? You don't teach a dog by beating it, right? That's not how you train an animal. In the same way, we don't benefit sentient beings by punishing them, you know? You're talking to a prison abolitionist, so like my lens for interpreting the Dharma is somewhat skewed, and I appreciate that's like an extreme stance, but it also comes from the point that I don't see benefit in that, right? You know, we have to be skillful in everything we do. We live in the world, so we have to be skillful with how we engage in the world. But all I do at the monastery is debate, is disputate, right? But we do that very hypothetically. It is skillful and intentional, right? They say when you go to the debate courtyard, you're supposed to be hampa chempo, which means arrogant. And the reason for that is because if I'm debating with you, and I say, "What do you think about this? Oh, what do you think about that?" Then like you're not pushing anymore, right? And the point of the huh?
You're showing a weakness.
Well, it's not about showing weakness as much as the point of debate within the Tibetan pedagogy is to push your limits of your understanding.
It's to open up,
right?
Challenge
And to challenge you, right? And so if I'm not challenging you, then
it's not criticism, it's opening
Yeah.
the mind.
but so in order to do that fully, you have to have a little bit of hampa chimpo, a little bit of arrogance. But then you have to leave it at the debate courtyard. They say when you leave the debate courtyard, that has to stay there. And the problem sometimes a lot of the monks are young, and so it doesn't always stay there. Sometimes there's a little bit of hurt feelings, but for the most part, you get used to So there's a lot of disputation that happens at the Tibetan monastery, at least. But in the real world, outside of the debate courtyard, the chora, you should avoid arguing with others.
Punishment is not required, Venerable, but you do require a certain degree of discipline and training. Now, you don't have to be rough with a child, but you to show it a certain direction. What do they?
Yeah, but that's different than punishing them. If you know what I mean? And again, I haven't raised a child, and I'm not going to tell someone how to raise their child. But I will say that when you see children who are, physically abused, that's not teaching them how to behave. It's teaching them to be scared, right? That's teaching you to be scared of something. And even depending on discipline, am I teaching you to be scared of negative consequences, or am I teaching you how to do something appropriately, right? And so, yeah, and we even talk about, their teachings, if your child runs into the street, you grab them and pull them out of the street, right? And you might even like yell at them out of fear or something. You might be harsh, but that's not the same thing as. Anyway, I agree that the discipline is important, but the question is, how do you teach discipline? And are you teaching discipline or fear, right? Are you teaching them to align their life with virtue, or are you teaching them that they will be experienced? Yes. But no, it's complicated. It's difficult. It's not easy. If it was easy, we'd be Buddhists. This is the whole thing, right? Yeah. Okay, so continuing. We say, be free of flattery and fickleness in friendship. Be steadfast and reliable at all times. Do not disparage others, but always abide with respectful demeanor. When giving advice, maintain compassion and altruism. That's the next section. Now, the first part, be free of fickleness in friendship. Like I said, that goes both ways. Both avoid friends who give you superficial flattery and are fickle in their friendship towards you, because that's no benefit to you. But also don't heap fickle praise on others, or rather superficial flattery on others. They say that when you want to benefit others, you need to have both a noble character and also a mind of faith. And the teacher says to immediately interact with others in a beneficial way. Having a noble character is more important. But having a mind of faith is what allows you to achieve all good qualities and to elicit good qualities in others. So having a noble character and also a mind of faith are both important. And so what does it mean to have a noble character? It means to set an example. It also means to be humble, to not act like you're a VIP, even if you are. You know what I mean? It means to not be self-congratulatory when you're right, you know? So to set an example of what it means to be a humble, simple person is to be of noble character. And that is what allows you to interact with others. I don't know if any of you have met different High Lamas, but some of the most amazing teachers I've met, whether they are like recognized as High Lamas like His Holiness or others, even monks at Sera, who I've met who are great teachers, they're some of the most humble people you'll ever meet. And when you're in their presence, you feel like they care about what you think and who you are as a person. And yet you know that they are, leagues ahead of you, like outside of your realm of being, because their practice and their intelligence and everything is so extreme. Yet when you're with them, they feel like all their attention is focused on you because they care about you. And they don't have this thing, look at how big my throne is. Look at, you know what I mean? It's not like that. And so we have to try to model that in our lives. Be of noble character, which is to say, have humility that is interwoven with wisdom, but also having a mind of faith is important. And here, mind of faith, again, it's not blind faith, but it's conviction based on our experience, based on our study, and based on our relationship to our teachers. Conviction, that type of faith allows us to then generate good qualities and to elicit the best of others. A mind that without faith makes it hard for others to have good qualities as well. Like you're not giving them the chance to grow as people. Now, what I think is, so be steadfast and reliable at all times. Again, common sense. Like be a good person. Just, do things right. Don't disparage others. I love it when teachings make sense. It's so easy. What I like about this verse and this level of this teaching is in the verse before this, it says, we always need to return criticism with compliments and with praise. That is like the fundamental meaning. And in this verse, it says, but don't be superficial with your praise. For me, that juxtaposition is really important. When I am giving a compliment, I have to mean it. And that means even when someone is insulting me to my face, if I'm going to compliment them or praise them, I need to mean it, right? Which is the hardest part. It's easy to say nice words, right? But nice words don't mean anything, If it's just hot air, then what's the point? So trying to find that balance of always praising others, but meaning what you say, even if it's the smallest thing. If someone is really mean to you, and even if you don't praise them out loud, but try to develop a mind for yourself that recognizes some good quality they have, right? Even if it's all you can do, and try to focus on that. So if someone is really mean to you, say, well, you know what? They're a good parent. They take good care of their kids. And if that's all you can do, it doesn't change the way they treat you. It doesn't make it easier, but you can focus on this one good quality they have. And even if you don't have to shout it to the rooftops, right? Ideally, hypothetically, if you're a bodhisattva, you would praise them out loud, but we're not bodhisattvas. We're doing the best we can. But try to say, this is a genuine good quality they have. So I can focus on that. Okay. And I can try to generate a mind that rejoices in that good quality. So it's not a mind that's superficial. It's genuine. And when you can start with those small things, then they get bigger. But again, and this verse is also reminding us that superficial praise that comes toward us is meaningless. And really, and again, this is one of these contradictions. I often talk about what I call the Bodhisattva paradox, which is that as someone engaging in the behavior of a Bodhisattva or trying to be a Bodhisattva, I understand it's my role to free all sentient beings from suffering. That's my job. That's my goal. And yet, no one is going to help free me from suffering except for me. Right? So that's like fundamentally opposite, right? So I think of that as the Bodhisattva paradox. And this is another one of those things. Whereas I want to avoid doing anything with the intention for praise. And when people praise me, even if it's genuine, recognize that that praise is nothing but empty words. right? Even if it's genuine praise, it's not fickle, it's not superficial, they mean it. And I did engage in whatever good activity that warranted that praise, it's still just words. So if I let that good praise, that non-superficial praise feed my ego, then what's the benefit, right? So even when someone's praising me, if it's valid, quote unquote, valid praise, I should still recognize that it's nothing but language. It's nothing but words. There's no truly existing self to receive that truly existing compliment. And so if I grab onto that praise and saying, oh, I deserve this, then even that good thing I did becomes tainted with this mind of self-cherishing, right? And so it's contradictory that I should be giving praise to others all the time, but when others give me praise, I should just kind of avoid it, at least in my mind. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Praise to others for their genuine quality, aren't you encouraging self-cherishing in them?
That's the question, right? That's why I said it's like a paradox. So what they say is you should be skillful, and you can very easily encourage self-cherishing in them, right? So if you know that your whatever your compliments are going to be is going to just cause them to be totally puffed up with ego, then you try to find another way to offer it, right? You you need to use your wisdom in every circumstance to say what is the best I can do in this circumstance. Sometimes encouraging someone's self-cherishing to some extent may be the best thing you can do, because at least giving them that praise gets them out of a more dangerous place, right? So it's kind of like a harm reduction model, right? And sometimes that praise, you keep it internal and you don't say it out loud, because if I say it out loud, all it's going to do is puff up your ego. And often there's some other middle ground. But I agree, like that's the contradiction, right? And so, but you can't let that be an excuse for them never doing it. That is the trick. Is say, well, if I compliment others, they're just going to have more self-cherishing minds. Therefore, I'm not going to compliment anyone. No, and that's what he's teaching with these verses. When you see others, you should do this, right? But you have to find the way to do it. The A is genuine from your own mind. That is not superficial and is not causing them, to the best of your ability, to create more attachment or grasping. Right. And again, we don't have control over others' minds. So I can't control that. But you can know sometimes, right? Like you have, especially with people that are in your life, you know that if I say this thing, they're gonna, ride high on it. So then maybe that's not the thing I do, right? So again, to the best of your ability. But it's not easy. Yeah. It's all balance. A lot of this, a lot of it is balance. And what you expect of yourself and what you expect of others is wildly different. Which can feel really harsh. It can feel really like, which I appreciate for these teachings because I have such a big head, but I can appreciate that some people come to the mind training modality of study and it feels like everything I do is wrong and bad. I'm nothing but a mess up. And therefore everyone else should, get all the compliments. It's easy to think that way because the teaching sometimes, like the language, directly says that. My favorite verse is from Kachin Gyalten. Kachin Gyalten is a student of the first Panchen Lama, Kachin Gyalten. And he has a prayer called the Crystal Mirror, clearly revealing my faults. And it is a prayer where he goes through all the different things all the ways that he presents himself to be a genuine Dharma practitioner, but then how he's like not living up to those expectations. And then he requests compassion from Avalokiteshvara to help him be a better student. But on one of them, he says, look at me, this like failure of a monk who shaved his head just so he could fill his belly. And for me, I think that's, the simple lines like that just cut really deep, And I've never like personally believed that I became a monk to get popular. Like that is not why I became a monk, but the idea of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? So the mind training for me is really helpful, but other people, it can feel like just like heaping more crap. So you have to find that balance. Balance is really important. And how can I not let myself cherishing mind get away with anything, but at the same time realize that I have to live in this life in a healthy way and have a healthy mind. And if all I'm doing is creating this like, this experience of like depression in myself for not being good enough, this sense that I'm never going to be good enough, then I'm not actually doing a skillful thing, right? And so the Dharma doesn't teach that. The Dharma doesn't say that that is how we should be approaching our life and our practice. So we have to find that balance. And for different people, it's going to be different things. For me, my ego is big enough that this is the most skillful way. But not everyone needs it, But that juxtaposition, like you said, is important. That's what we talk about in all the teachings. We say that there's two types of accumulation, right? There's the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. So those two things are the accumulation of wisdom is focused on your understanding of the nature of reality and developing a mind of that recognizes emptiness and meditates on emptiness. And through that, you develop the accumulation of wisdom. Accumulation of merit is based in your practices of the paramitas, essentially, like if we're keeping it simple. But all of that is to say, focus on compassion and bodhicitta, right? So then we have the two wings of the bird. One is wisdom and one is compassion or bodhicitta or skillful means. We use the same kind of language, but those mean those two things, right? So everything we're doing should have those two aspects. So that wisdom aspect is one we can't ever forget. And the wisdom itself comes in two flavors, right? There is ultimate wisdom and conventional wisdom. Ultimate wisdom is understanding the nature of reality, but conventional wisdom is the wisdom we use to live in the world and the wisdom that we have to pair with everything else we do. And so whenever we engage in any practice, we need to bring that wisdom aspect. That includes these kind of practices that involve what seem like contradictions. For what I expect of myself and what I expect of others often seem contradictory. So I have to find a way to create a bridge between those two things that is healthy and is always moving me closer to Buddhahood. And wisdom is going to help with that. Hypothetically. Moving on. Never defame the teachings. Whatever practices you admire, with aspiration and the 10 spiritual deeds, strive diligently, dividing day and night. So this is a reminder that all of the teachings of the Buddha are valid teachings, right? You know, if you've taken bodhisattva vows, one of your bodhisattva vows is to never disparage the Hinayana teachings. So all the teachings of the Buddha were taught for a reason. And they were taught for the needs of the students that need to hear those teachings. Now, I've heard some teachers expand that to say that all spiritual teachings, even outside of Buddhism, you can have a similar opinion on that. And I think to some extent that's a useful mindset. And you could argue with it here and there. But His Holiness Dalai Lama, when he teaches in the West, if he's teaching to general audiences, to general teachings, not like actual Dharma talks, he'll say, my goal isn't to make more Buddhists. My goal isn't to convert anyone. For most people, whatever religious tradition and cultural tradition you grew up in, if you practice that, that's going to be your best opportunity to be the best person possible. Then, if you try that and it doesn't work, then maybe you become Buddhist, right? But the goal of any spiritual tradition, at least according to the Dalai Lama and according to me, is to make us better people, to teach us how to serve others in a meaningful way, right? And so any tradition or practice that someone has that as their goal, we should never disparage it, even if it isn't doing things the way we would. And even if we say that maybe this is, we look at any of the Christian tradition, let's say, believing in a creator God, we say is only creating more suffering. But there's explicit teachings from the Indian teachers as well as the Tibetan teachers that say the belief in a creator God is one of the causes, is one of the beliefs of the Tirthikas, the non-Buddhists, that cause them to cycle into suffering in samsara over and over again, right? So we can say that, and we have a reasoning behind it. But if I went to school with a lot of people who were Christian ministers when I got my master's of divinity degree, and I saw them embracing their faith, and they were incredible, incredible people. And it was their faith that made them those kind of people, right? And if I were to try to force my faith on them, it wouldn't have made them better people because that's not where they were. So I can appreciate that their faith tradition, whatever it was, let them be good people, even if I don't agree with it. So I think you can expand this outside of the Buddhist teachings. Now, do I think that those traditions will bring you to Buddhahood eventually? No, but they're moving you forward. If you are doing everything you can to be a good person, that's moving you closer to Buddhahood. It doesn't matter if it's in the Buddhist path or not, right? That's one of the benefits of believing in reincarnation and believing that we don't have to solve everything in this life, that we're just moving forward. We're trying to do the best we can every day to look a little bit closer to Buddhahood. That is one of the really easy benefits is that you see that, okay, your path is different than mine, but the goal over there, you're moving it. Maybe you're doing the tourist route, but you're still moving in that direction, One of my best friends back home passed away recently because of bishop in this Celtic Orthodox Christianity. Very strange, weird sect of pre-Catholic Christianity. When I met him, he was teaching French at Harvard and theological French at the divinity school. And his house, where he also gave sermons, teachings out of, was right next to the Dharma Center that I went to, right down the road. And you walk into his house or his apartment rather, and he has pictures of Hindu saints and bodhisattvas and Celtic Orthodox saints, Christian saints all over his walls. And one of my friends met him. He was teaching one of the Lama Yeshe's texts in his class. One of Lama Yeshe's texts, one of the free books from the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, had been translated into French. And he was having his students translate the French back into English as part of his text. And this person was, I've met a handful of people outside of like high lamas in my life who I think are really close to being bodhisattvas, and he was one of them. Yeah, he's Christian, very Christian, right? And so I think never defaming the teachings here is explicitly talking about all the teachings of the Buddha are valid, and they're all going to lead to Buddhahood, just maybe different timescales, including all the Hinayana teachings, all the Theravada teachings. But I also think we can look at anyone leading a genuine spiritual life and say, what is the benefit in me criticizing this, right? Now, if what they're doing is harmful, if you say your spiritual tradition involves sacrificing animals, or doing other harmful activities, then that's worth criticizing. It's not saying everything goes just because you call it spiritual. No. But it's saying that if someone's living a life that's making them a good person and is leading them towards righteousness in some sort of way, then why would we criticize it? And then the flip side of that is, does it benefit me to criticize it? So if I'm looking at someone else's behavior, how is criticizing that helping me? Is it actually helping them, or is it just helping my ego saying, I know better than you? Right? So we have to find that balance. If their actions are harmful and our criticism can help them, prevent them from engaging in harmful action, then yes, we should do it. But we have to say, am I actually trying to help them, or am I trying to help my ego? So never defaming the teachings. Now, whatever practices you admire with aspiration, and the 10 spiritual deeds, strive diligently. So this is also recognizing that within the teachings of the Buddha, there are many different ways of understanding the teachings, many different styles, many different teachings. And we have to find the tradition of teaching that is beneficial to our mind and then diligently pursue it, right? Now, that isn't saying don't study outside of your tradition, but it's saying that when you find what works for your mind, why would you then keep floating around and trying other things, And what we say, as contemporary teachers who now look at like the 4 different Tibetan traditions, right? The Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug. His Holiness Dalai Lama has said all 4 traditions are authentic teachings that will lead you to Buddhahood if you practice them, right? So there's no contradiction there. Whereas we say, the Hinayana practices or the Zen practices are misunderstandings of the teachings are misunderstandings of the nature of reality that were taught for certain disciples. But if you practice them, you won't actually become a Buddha. Eventually, you have to understand the teachings the way they're taught in the Tibetan tradition, which is the Prasangika tradition. It's nothing to do with the Tibetans, it has to do with the Prasangika. But all 4 Tibetan lineages do practice that correctly, but they have different ways of doing it. Yet at the same time, we're advised we really shouldn't, especially as new students, do too many practices outside of whatever our tradition is. And the reason for that isn't because they're wrong, but it's because they talk about things in different ways. They use different terminology. They use different meditative practices. And if we start picking and choosing the things we like, it's very easy to get confused. And from that confusion, it's very easy to think, oh, these 2 things are contradictory, right? Which then creates a sense of defaming the tradition because this one's right, this one's wrong. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Once you have some sort of confident understanding of your tradition, then we're encouraged to continue studying, right? And the Dalai Lama is considered a master of all four traditions. Kyabje Lama's of Rinpoche was often called he's often called the Nyingma Lama, right? Because his past reincarnation was from a Nyingmapa family, and he was born to a Nyingmapa family. And when he was 5 or 6 is when he decided to become Gelug because he saw some Gelug monks, and he was impressed by how disciplined they were. So as a young boy in Lhasa with his uncle, he saw these monks going. He said, "I'm going to follow them." But so the idea of being strict to your tradition, to your monastery's position, to your specific, that's not the point. But the point is recognizing your mind and that our minds need structure. And so if we're constantly jumping around, then we're not being diligent in our practice. So here it's saying, observe all the different teachings of the Buddha, observe the different practices, and then find which one works for your mind, and then strive towards it, right? That's the important thing. Be diligent. Here it says dividing day and night. Generally, they say that we divide our practice, hypothetically, into 3 sessions during the day and 3 sessions at night. So you can be doing 6 sessions of practice a day. How many? The durations are very strange. It has to do. It comes from Vinaya actually, and it looks at like the timing of the sunrise and the sunset and these things. But generally, if you were to split the day into 6 sessions, into 6 equidistant sessions, then you should be doing 1 session in each of those 6. That's not really pragmatic for most of us. But as long as you're always trying to have this idea of compassion, and the idea of bodhicitta, and the idea of getting rid of the self-cherishing mind as your motivation, then you keep that continual. Here, it's really talking about when you're doing extensive like meditation practice, right? Now, the 10 spiritual deeds here, this can mean a couple different things. One of them is the 10 paramitas, right? So we often talk about the 6 paramitas, but then it's extended to the 10 paramitas. So what are the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections? Generosity. Let's go in order. Yeah, morality. Then patience, effort. No, bodhicitta, no. Concentration, that's number 5.
Sorry, concentration, wisdom.
And wisdom. Okay, so those are the 6, the first 6. Those are the most common, right? Generosity, morality, patience, joyful effort, concentration, and wisdom. But sometimes they're divided as 10. So what are the next 4? That's okay. So we don't talk about them as often because they're kind of ancillary and they kind of are included with the first 6. But they are perfection of strength, skillful means, prayer, and knowledge. Top, monlam, yeshe. Top is strength or power, sometimes it's translated. Skillful means, prayer, and knowledge, which is, or sometimes it's, the translation of these is hard. Sometimes it's called insight, but it's different than the wisdom realizing emptiness. It's a different word.
Not wisdom, it's different.
It's sometimes, the word is sometimes translated as wisdom, but it doesn't mean wisdom realizing emptiness. We already had that. That's number 6. So this is a different type of understanding. So sometimes here, in any case, here it says, with aspiration in the 10 spiritual deeds, it can mean those 10. It can also mean the 10 virtuous activities. So avoiding the 10 non-virtues, right? The 10 virtuous activities, 3 virtuous activities of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind, which are just the reverse of the 10 non-virtues. And there are other lists, there are lots of lists about, we love our lists. So you can find other teachings that say these are the 10 spiritual deeds. But essentially what it is saying is avoiding non-virtue and engaging in virtue and engaging in the practice of bodhisattva. One of the commentaries on this says that one of the most important things is no matter your practice, no matter how much you know, no matter how greatly learned you are, you should always be striving to learn more. That is one of the most important spiritual practices we can do, is always striving to learn more. And then what you learn, you take that meaning to heart, right? So you don't just learn more for the sake of learning it. You actually learn more for the sake of transforming your mind. That's the whole purpose of study, right? And you do that by meditating on it again and again. And so that's where we have this idea of, study, contemplation, and meditation. That comes in here. You should always be striving to learn more. The more you learn, then you bring that into a contemplation, which is to say you engage in it in a meaningful way. You try to make sure you understand it fully, and then you meditate on it to make it indistinguishable from your mind. So no matter how well learned you are, how many PhDs you have, you should keep going, right? And that is one of the types of important spiritual practice.
It said the paramita of power and about paramita of skillful means. We are talking about using your physical strength in the right way.
No.
Use your mental strength in the right way, also channelizing it.
So here, power or strength is sometimes translated. It doesn't mean physical strength. There are a number of the 5 powers of the Buddha have to do with the Buddha's concentration, the Buddha's top ngatang, concentration, mindfulness, Trempeto, Tinizangito, Sheshingito. There are 5 qualities of mind the Buddha has, and they are called the 5 types of power or 5 strengths. And those are what we're trying to embody. But again, those later 4 paramitas are really included in the first 6, So like top skillful means is included in there as well. But when you divide them out as 10, you have them that way. And you actually, if you look at the teachings, the Hinayana traditions also have 10 paramitas, right? The Hinayana traditions have a whole complicated idea of compassion and the importance of compassion and how it's necessary to have compassion in order to become arhat. They just don't have a mind of bodhicitta the way we do. And they talk about some of these things differently. But they have this idea of paramita being a perfected activity. They have those same ideas. They don't line up 100%, but they're very, very similar to the Mahayana tradition, which again just goes that you should never look down on the quote unquote Hinayana traditions. When I use the word Hinayana, I know some people don't like the term Hinayana, but it means something very specific. So contemporary practitioners are Theravada practitioners, but Hinayana encompasses a number of different schools, and the Theravada school is only one of the Hinayana schools. And so if you're talking from a historical lens, then to call them all Theravada would be inaccurate, right? Because there's just many different schools that have similar belief systems or philosophical ideas that are incorporated into them. So with aspiration, right? So that is important. What do we mean by aspiration? It is always making sure that our mind is focused on Buddhahood. And Buddhahood is for the benefit of others, not for the benefit of ourselves. You know, bodhicitta is what causes us to succeed in all of our spiritual practice. That's important to remember. Without bodhicitta, we'll not make any real progress anywhere. Now, again, you can become an arhat without bodhicitta if you have renunciation. But then you just have to start all over again when you get to the Mahayana paths, right? You still have, if you're following the sutra system, even an arhat, a Shravaka arhat or a Pratyeka Buddha arhat, who has abandoned all of the afflicted minds, as well as the seeds of the afflicted minds, they still will take 3 countless gradients to become Buddha from the time they enter into the Mahayana path, right? Because they don't have bodhicitta, and so then they have to reaccumulate a whole bunch of merit based on their experience of bodhicitta. They'll have a direct realization of the nature of reality. To be an arhat means you have an understanding of emptiness, and it means to actually be an arhat means you have eliminated all of the afflicted minds, right? But you haven't eliminated the obstacles to omniscience, which is to say you haven't eliminated the dualistic view of reality. Even though you know intellectually that the way things appear is not how they actually exist, they still appear that way to you, right? You haven't eliminated that affliction. We have 2 afflictions: the afflicted obscurations, or there's 2 obscurations: the afflicted obscurations and the mental obscurations, I suppose they're called, or shade. There's another word for it in English, I don't know. We call it the obscurations to omniscience. That's the easiest one, right? And arhat eliminates the first kind. They don't eliminate the second kind. So you still have to start all over again. So bodhicitta is necessary for real spiritual progress. Even when your goal is improving your own mind, bodhicitta is what's going to get you there. So it's the mind that focuses on the benefit of others. It's always going to propel you, right? It's like the gas. It's like the fuel in all of your practice. So here, with aspiration and the 10 spiritual deeds, strive diligently. If you want to be able to actually exert effort, you need that fuel. The fuel is the wish to benefit others. And for me, the easy way to think about that is we spent our whole life trying to benefit ourselves only, right? And we're suffering. And so clearly that is not bringing us spiritual relief, working to our own benefit. And just that little bit of logic allows me, at least in my practice, to say, okay, then it makes sense that if I've spent my whole life trying to fuel my activities with a focus on my own benefit, and it hasn't gotten me anything but suffering or very temporary happiness here and there, then clearly that's not the right fuel, right? And so the other option is trying to benefit others instead.
That would say another, someone who's not got rid of their self-cherishing mind.
No, they have gotten rid of self-cherishing mind.
They have.
Yeah. So the self-cherishing mind is an afflicted mind, one of the afflicted obscurations. So they've gotten rid of all afflicted obscurations. They've achieved nirvana. They just haven't gotten rid of the dualistic view, and they haven't gotten rid of the imprints of the dualistic view, which means that everything that appears to them appears as if it were truly existent. Even though they have the understanding that it isn't, it still appears that way to them. So that is their obstacle that they have to overcome before they become Buddhas, which seems like it's not that big of an obstacle, except that they've exhausted so much of their merit in the process of becoming arhats that they have to start all over. We talk about the paths, the 5 paths, right? The path of preparation, the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, the path of seeing, path of meditation, and the path of no more learning. By path, I mean these types of levels of mind that you achieve. When you enter into the Mahayana path, if you're only following the Sutra school, if you're not practicing Tantra, it takes 3 countless great eons to get to the path of to become Buddha. And an Arhat, when they start the Mahayana path, still have to go through those 3 countless great eons because they need to accumulate merit that is conjoined with bodhicitta. So even though they have the wisdom, their wisdom isn't conjoined with bodhicitta, so it's not powerful enough to actually get them all the way. I mean, it's still an incredible achievement, and they have no self-cherishing, right? It's not to say it's worthless, but it's only halfway kind of. And so from our side, we say, if you do all that work, all the amount of energy it takes to get there, but then you have to start over again, essentially. And to be fair, like an Arhat starting on the path of accumulation, they already have a realization of emptiness. So some things will come a lot easier to them than they would to others, right? Because they've done so much work already, but they need that bodhicitta to give them the power to get to the next level. So, okay. Continuing the next 2 verses, 23 and 24. So this is so now we're done, right? This is we've kind of finished our teaching, and now we're at the end of the prayer, right? So this is the last of the advice of the prayer, is this last what we did, 22. Strive diligently day and night, right? And now we say, just like we say when all of our practices are done, we want to then dedicate our practice, right? So here, the next 2 verses are about dedication. Oh, wait, sorry, before I get there, one thing I wanted to talk about. In the commentary on this chapter, on verse 22, one of the things that Tisha points out are one of the biggest, the strongest means to forsake the Dharma are what he calls the 3 excuses. And the 3 excuses are all different types of laziness, but they're the 3 excuses of the young person to say that I'm too young now and I don't have the means, so I will engage in spiritual practice when I'm older. And then for the hardy middle-aged person who has everything to say, well, I'm in the prime of my life right now. I should enjoy it now, and I'll practice Dharma later when I don't have all these nice things around me. And then the excuse of the old person to say, well, I don't have any strength or intelligence now. I've wasted it all, so there's no point in practicing now, right? So these 3 excuses, they're really appealing, and they are the strongest means to forsake the Dharma. They're easy to fall into, right? And so when you talk about striving diligently, it means forsaking laziness, right? And again, laziness isn't just procrastinating. That's one type of laziness. We generally talk about 3 types of laziness, right? So there's a laziness of procrastination that's often called the laziness of sloth, things like this, which is exactly what we think of as laziness. The other 2 types of laziness is one, it's the laziness of having self-deprecating thoughts to say that I'm not good enough to do this, therefore I won't, right? And putting away, like, I'm not a good meditator, therefore what's the point? Or, I'm not smart enough to, or haven't achieved any realization, so I'm not going to go attend this teaching, blah, blah, blah. That kind of is also a type of laziness. We don't think of it as laziness in worldly terms, but it really is a type of laziness. And then the third type of laziness is the interest in pursuing non-Dharma activities. So all of the many things you do that have you running around in circles, we actually identify that as a type of laziness. So laziness doesn't just mean like sitting on your couch watching Netflix. It can be doing lots of things that seem like you're very active, but they're non-Dharma. So attraction to non-Dharma activity is a type of laziness. So here, when we say strive diligently, it really means we have to forsake laziness. And one of the strongest ways to do that, obviously, the antidote to laziness is, one of the primary antidotes is joyful effort or diligence, as we sometimes call it. But recognizing the 3 excuses and seeing how often we rely upon those in our life is a useful kind of shortcut to say, am I being lazy right now? There are many ways to pursue the Dharma, right? That's what Atisha says very clearly. There are many different ways to pursue the Dharma. If your outlook is not in error, then that means what you're doing is Dharma. And so Atisha obviously was a great scholar and a monk, but Dromtonpa was a layperson who had a family. And so in his teaching to Dromtonpa, he says clearly there are many ways to pursue the Dharma. It's all about your outlook, right? And so for me, that's a reminder that not everyone practices the Dharma in the same way. And so we need to figure out the way that we can infuse the Dharma into everything we do that works with our life. Now, as a monk, as someone who like gave up or has done his best to give up worldly life, my way of doing that is very extreme, right? And it works for me because I have the right imprints from past lives and the right resources and circumstances in this life that allow me to do that. But I did give up like a 10-year relationship, and I've given up a lot of relationships with my family. Not giving them up, but like obviously I'm not with them anymore. I have a couple thousand miles of distance. Because for me, that made sense and that worked for my life. That doesn't work for everyone's life. It doesn't mean that you're practicing Dharma inadequately. It means that the way you practice Dharma is going to be different than the way I do. And so as long as your intention is correct, and as long as you are pursuing to always improve your practice and improve your intellect, your understanding of the Dharma intellectually, and bring that into your meditative practice, then that is sufficient, as it's translated. I don't know if that's like, that's not a very nice word, but that's what the Dharma is. The Dharma has to meet us where we are. Or rather, it doesn't have to, it does meet us where we are. Right? The Dharma doesn't have to change to meet the needs of the students because the Dharma already encompasses everything all of us needs. We just have to find a way to incorporate it into our life in the most meaningful way. Right? I can't imagine like how difficult it is. Never mind practicing Dharma. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were both talking about our nibblings, our nephews and nieces, and both of us obviously are. I'm childless, and he's also childless. He and his wife don't have any kids, and they won't ever have kids. And just like how difficult it is to raise kids, like like it's a hard thing to do. And like my sister, often I talk to my sister, when she like there are like existential moments when you look at the state of politics right now and the state of the world, and she's like, did we do the right thing? And now we have, my sister's kids are wonderful, beautiful kids. One's 10 and one is 7 or turning 7. Wouldn't trade them for the world. But like there's a lot of existential like weight on that, right? And like I'm really happy to not have any kids to raise. I think it's really easy to be a good uncle. I mean, I'm a couple thousand miles away, but even if I'm there, uncles and aunts, it's so easy, right?
Yeah.
You take the kids, you give them whatever they want, you get them all excited, then you give them back. Right? But realistically, so for someone with a family, to practice Dharma is just different than the way I'm going to practice Dharma, right? And it doesn't make it any lesser or any better or any one way or the other. But we have to recognize the Dharma is all encompassing. The Dharma can fit all of our lives and make us all better people. So we have to see what we can do. And that doesn't mean making excuses. That's always a trick, right? It's very easy to make excuses. Say, well, I'm not a monk or I'm not a nun, therefore I don't have to do this thing. That may not be true, right? So we have to always push ourselves, right? But be kind to ourselves at the same time. That's the important thing. Be kind to ourselves, recognize our limitations, always try to push ourselves a little bit. We should always be pushing against our own boundaries because slowly our boundaries will expand, right? But be kind to ourselves and realize sometimes what I'm expecting of me and what is expected of someone else who's in a different life circumstance, not going to be the same thing. So I have to do the best I can do, which is not the best that other people can do. It may be better, it may be worse, quote unquote, whatever that may mean. It's going to be different than the important thing. And the Dharma is big enough to embrace all of that, right? So when we strive diligently, we forsake laziness that recognizes that our practice is not going to look the same as everyone else's. That doesn't make it illegitimate. It just means that we have to find a way to make our practice meaningful to our life. Okay, and so then, now that at the end of this teaching, we have a talk about dedication, right? So whenever you engage in virtuous activity, you want to dedicate it. So the next 2 verses say, whatever virtues you gather through the 3 times, dedicate them toward the unexcelled great awakening. Disperse your merit to all sentient beings and utter the peerless aspiration prayers of the 7 limbs at all times. If you proceed thus, you'll swiftly perfect merit and wisdom and eliminate the 2 defilements. Since your human existence will become meaningful, you'll attain the unexcelled enlightenment. So the importance of our practice is something we should never take for granted. But in that same vein, through our practice, we should constantly be rejoicing that we have a spiritual practice at all. How many people in this life haven't met a spiritual practice? Never mind a Buddhist practice, just any practice where they're actually trying to improve their mind in a meaningful way, right? So whenever we engage in any small activity, it should be an opportunity to rejoice. And then we dedicate that merit to hope others can be very similar. that they can achieve some sort of peace and happiness in this life and in future lives. And that makes our practice more well-rounded. What I think is important about this verse to remember, well, first off, we have in the first one, the peerless aspiration prayers are the prayers that you wish. There are many different types of aspiration prayers, but ultimately they're all prayers about you achieving Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. But sometimes they can be different. So, for instance, if you engage in medicine Buddha practice, right? We have the 7 medicine Buddhas, and each of those have like specific prayers that they made before they become Buddhas. May I help sentient beings in this specific circumstance? So there are different types of aspirational prayers that you can make like that, but they're all focused on benefiting others in one way or another, right? Most important here is it says of the 7 limbs at all times. The aspiration prayer is the 7 limbs, so we know the 7 limb practice, right? We did one at the beginning of the class today. You start with prostrations, and then offerings, then confession, rejoicing, requesting, beseeching, dedication. So those 7 limbs of practice encompass all aspects of the path of practice. So it's saying that make sure all of your practices, even if it's just sitting and meditating for 15 minutes in the morning, you include all 7 limbs, right? So when you sit down to meditate, right, do prostrations, either physical or mental prostrations, then you make an offering to the Buddhas, even if it's not physical. You can visualize an offering like we do a mandala offering, something like this. And then you can actually engage in the practice at that point. So you've done the first, and then you can do confession first sometimes, recognizing that you have engaged in negative actions and developing the wish to not engage in negative actions in the future. You're not trying to conceal any negative actions you've done, whether they're actions you remember doing or don't remember doing. Then you can engage, like if you're meditating, for instance, engage in your meditation practice. And then at the end of that, you rejoice, you recognize that you've engaged in this practice today, you've accumulated some virtue, rejoice in that virtue, rejoice in your motivation, rejoice in your step towards Buddhahood. And then you request the teachers to continue teaching the Dharma and request they don't leave samsara until samsara is emptied. And then you dedicate that merit. So you've made that 15-minute practice, you've added maybe, 2 minutes of prayers to it, but you've made it a fully complete practice that has all 7 limbs, right? So it's very easy to do. So we should try to make all of our practices complete in that way, with all those 7 limbs. And a lot of the prayers that we study, or that we have as part of our tradition, make that easy for us, right? Like they include multiple, like we have that one prayer that we recite, which is literally 7 lines, that includes all 7 limbs. So you could just recite that prayer, but you reciting it and not reflecting on it is just hot air. So you still have to have some sort of mental activity, but that prayer makes it nice and concise, If you really want to follow Lama Zopa Rinpoche's advice, you should always pause on the rejoicing. Whenever he does rejoicing, he just stops everything, because rejoicing is so powerful and important. So he always takes a few minutes to just rejoice, like sit in that for a few minutes and then continue it. But so we have in our tradition different prayers that make it easier. There's a really beautiful extensive dedication prayer that is in the commentary to this, in the Book of Kadam, going back and forth between Atisha and Dromtonpa. Atisha gives this really extensive dedication prayer, and then Dromtonpa's like, well, that's a little bit complicated. Can you give us an easier one? And he's like, okay, here's an easier one. And he does another dedication prayer that's like easier. It's very, very funny. But there are lots of prayers that are both concise and more extensive, but it's important to try to make all of our practices complete in this way. So that's why we always end with dedication, right? And it says, if you proceed thus, you'll quickly perfect merit and wisdom. So like I said, the 2 wings of the bird, right? The merit here being all of our activities that are based in compassion, bodhicitta, skillful means. That's what is the collection of merit. And wisdom, all of those practices that are based in us trying to understand the nature of reality and how those 2 work together. And by eliminating the 2 defilements here, again, I call it the 2 obscurations. So the obscurations, or the 2, the 2 obscurations, the afflicted obscurations, and then the obscurations to omniscience. Here, at least in my translation, it calls them the 2 defilements. I don't know, this one that you're using, if it's the same translation as what I have. To omniscience. There's another word in English for it, but I do not remember it, and I apologize for that. But there's the afflicted obscurations, and then it could the cognitive obscurations. Yeah, I think it's sometimes called the cognitive obscurations. There's the second one. But
So like distortions.
those are the ones that's the dualistic appearance. The cognitive obscurations slash obscurations to omniscience are the dualistic appearance for the most part. There's some other things, but that's the main one. That's the most important one. So that, we say that in the prasangika system, for a sentient being, all of our five sense organs, for instance, whatever I perceive, like say with my eye consciousness, I perceive this cup. My eye consciousness perceives this cup as if it were truly existent, right? And so there's that dualistic appearance of the cup that is naturally there. Now, whether I believe it or not, whether I grasp onto it or not, is separate. But that appearance itself, it appears as if it truly exists. So that appearance is cognitive obscuration. And the only beings that don't have it are Buddhas. So in order to become Buddha, it involves engaging and meditating on the nature of reality to such an extent, combined with bodhicitta, to overcome that dualistic appearance. Not just dualistic grasping, but also dualistic appearance. In the grounds and paths teachings, we say that once you have a direct realization of emptiness, you achieve what's called the bodhisattva grounds, and there are 10 bodhisattva grounds. Right? And the first 7 of those bodhisattva grounds are called the impure bodhisattva grounds. So as you progress on those 7, you are overcoming the afflicted obscurations. And then as you go through the last 3, that's when you overcome the cognitive obscurations. So they go sequentially like that. And so that since if you proceed in this way, which is to say, if you engage in a 7-limb prayer and make all of your practices imbued with both the merit and wisdom, then your human existence will be meaningful. This is one of the heart of our practices. So what does it mean to lead a meaningful life? What does that mean? Like, what's the meaning of life? What's it mean to lead a meaningful life? And here we say the meaning of life is to benefit others, right? To serve others to the best of our capacity. And we do so with these 2 things, bodhicitta and wisdom. So the wish to become Buddha to benefit others, which is to say the realization that right now as a suffering sentient being, my benefit is limited. So I wish to perfect my own mind, which will give me the greatest capacity to be a benefit to others. So to wish to become Buddha to benefit others, that's what it means to have bodhicitta, right? Which is like one step above compassion. We generally say there's compassion, which is the wish for others not to suffer. And then there is so what's often called like the special intention. When you study how to develop compassion, the different steps to the 7-fold cause and effect meditation and so forth. After developing compassion, which is the wish for others not to suffer, you have what's called laksam. So that's the special intention. So it's to say, not just do I wish others not to suffer, but I take it upon me as my responsibility to free them from their suffering. And then from there, you say, in order to do that, I will achieve Buddhahood. And that's bodhicitta. So that's like the 3 different levels of strength. You first have compassion, and then compassion that's infused with the special intention, and then bodhicitta. And so when you have all of your activities are infused with that mind, as well as a mind of wisdom, that is what it means to lead a meaningful life. Doesn't mean having a well-paying job, doesn't mean having a lot of followers, it doesn't mean being popular. It means dedicating your life to helping others to whatever capacity you can. And you realize that working on your own mind is the primary way to give you the tools to do that. And then if you have depending on your resources and your means and your circumstances, there are other things you can do as well. And then, so that is the kind of end of the text, but then we have the summary of the text in the next verse and a half. So the next verse and a half says, the wealth of faith, the wealth of morality, the wealth of giving, the wealth of learning, the wealth of conscience, the wealth of shame, and the wealth of insight. These are the 7 riches. These precious and excellent jewels are the 7 inexhaustible riches. Do not speak of these to those who are not human. We'll talk about that. That last line is a little weird. But so earlier I talked about the 7 jewels, or the 7 types of wealth of an Arya being. And that's what's listed here. So the first one is faith. So faith is the first wealth, or the first jewel of an Arya. And faith is important because it attracts all sentient beings, right? Faith is attractive in that way. It attracts us to the Dharma, and it attracts others to us and to our practice. So faith is often compared to a lamp, because a lamp lights itself while lighting the environment around it. So faith in that way isn't only focused on me, but it's on, by illuminating me, what can I illuminate around me? And faith does that. And again, it's not blind faith, it's faith or conviction based on your study and your experience. So faith is the first one. And an Arya being has inexhaustible faith. So these 7 jewels or 7 types of wealth are inexhaustible, as it says, for an Arya being. And then after faith is morality. So morality being the fertile soil from which all accomplishments are grown. You know, one of the primary causes to be reborn as a human is having stainless morality, right? So it's really important. Our Dharma practice is based on us being born with a perfect human rebirth, and that itself is based largely, one of the primary causes of that is stainless morality in past lives. So morality in this way is the fertile soil, they say. And then after morality, we have generosity or giving. And most importantly, giving without any hope of reward. Atisha says in his commentary, if you look in the whole world, look at all of the rulers who are willing to give away their entire kingdom. And more rare than that are the rulers or people who are willing to give away their children and their spouse. And even more rare than that are the people who are willing to give away their own life. And even more rare than that are those who are willing to give anything without hope of reward. So it's not easy. But real generosity has no hope of reward. So that is something that's inexhaustible. And then learning, that's the next one, right? The wealth of learning, as we said, we talked about the importance of no matter how well versed you are in the treaties or the teachings, you always should be striving to learn more. And then engaging in the 3 of study, contemplation, and meditation, so that what you learn doesn't become dry learning, but actually becomes indistinguishable from your mind. So learning has to be combined with having a right motivation, right? If you only are trying to learn something so you can, gain worldly success, then that's not useful. But a bodhisattva never stops learning, which I think is also impressive to me, that these beings who are, so close to being Buddhas already, they're still learning. It's still an important part of their spiritual practice. And then shame and conscience, or sometimes translated as embarrassment. So here, these are the recognition when you engage in negative actions or non-virtuous actions to not want to do them again in the future, right? And the recognition that, we say without shame or embarrassment, then we would very quickly destroy all of our virtue we've created, because we would have no reason to not engage in non-virtue. So again, shame and embarrassment here, it's translated as conscience, is not looking at yourself for engaging in a negative action as being a bad person, but recognizing that when you engage in negative actions, those are only going to lead to suffering, and therefore the wish not to do it. And the distinction between shame and embarrassment is one of them is when you engage in negative actions in front of others, and one when you're on your own. But otherwise, it's the same type of mind. Then lastly, here is translated as wisdom, as insight, but it's wisdom, the wisdom that realizes the nature of reality, as well as the conventional wisdom that allows us to be skillful in the way we engage with the teachings of the Buddha. So wisdom accompanies all of our other activities in the same way that bodhicitta needs to accompany all of our activities. So those are the 7 wealths of an Arya, the 7 types of jewel. And Atisha, in his commentary, where he says, do not speak of these to those who are not human, he is referencing, at least in the commentary, like harmful spirits who only want to cause harm to the Dharma in general. And by giving these teachings to them, for some reason, it can just cause them to cause more harm. And so they say that, like, for instance, wise teachings coming from the mouths of a charlatan still cause harm to others, right? But for me, I don't really worry about this line that much, because I don't really engage in many activities with non-humans. This isn't about dogs or cats. It has to do with like harmful spirits. So as long as you are not like dealing with harmful spirits on the regular, you don't have to worry about it. I don't think.
It sounds like they might need it more.
It does, but then they do need it more. But you also have to be skillful. So, like for instance, when you take bodhisattva vows, you don't teach emptiness to those who are unskilled. That's one of your bodhisattva vows, right? And so you have to recognize the needs of the student, and you teach in such a way that's appropriate for those students. And so, for some reason, this teaching is not appropriate for certain types of students, such as non-human harmful spirits. I don't know why, but that is an important point, though, is that like they need these teachings, but this may not be the best vehicle for them to receive it, right? And so we have the explicit vows about that, like bodhisattva vows and then your tantric vows. What you teach the students, so you have to only teach the students who are appropriate for the teachings you're giving, you know. And then lastly, the kind of real summary, if you were to summarize the whole thing, is the last two lines. When you're among others, you should guard your speech, and when you're alone, you should guard your mind. Right? That is like the essence. And that's very similar to, one of the verses that we recite in the beginning that is actually from the Vajrapāta Sutra, but it's included in our prayer, the praise to Shakyamuni. Right? Do no harm. What is the translation we have here? It is do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, and subdue your mind thoroughly. That's the teaching of the Buddha. That contains like all of the Buddhist teachings. This is another way of summarizing it. When you're around others, be careful of your speech. That shows that when you're around others, you're engaging in actions, you're being conscientious of others, right? And how you can benefit them. And when you're on your own, you're watching your mind. Okay, so it is past time. So are there any questions you want to go over? So we managed to get through this text. That's great. That means that next week, Venerable Padma will begin the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and we'll continue our journey into Lojong study. But any questions for this text or in general that come up for today?
Yeah, but you said you mentioned another book, Peacock in a Poisonous Bloom.
Yeah.
Isn't that?
That's also by Dharma Rakshita. Yeah. There's a really
Study that in my memory.
well so then we can request that maybe sometime next year. I'm sure we'd be happy to have that as one of the teachings. Yeah. The Peacock in the Poison Grove. There are in the big book of mind training. There's a translation of it, and then also there is a book. I think you have it. That is a commentary on it by Geshe Sonam, I believe. It's a blue book, and it has the text and a translation back to back. Anyway, there's some really wonderful books on it. It's a very common. So the idea of peacock in the poison grove is that Tibetans have this belief, or the Indians have this belief, that peacocks eat poison, and it comes from the belief that Vishnu ate poison and it gets stuck in his throat and causes his throat to be turn blue, and so they believe the same thing of the peacocks. And peacocks do eat some nightshade, things like this.
That's why their feathers are blue. So that's what they say, that because they eat the poison.
Yeah. So that's what they say. I don't know biologically if that's correct, but that's the belief. And so the teaching is about how you take the difficulties and sufferings of life and then transform them into parts of your practice. So that's what being like a peacock who takes the poison and makes the poison into Dharma practice. But so yeah, we can definitely, if there's interest in that text, we can teach it sometime in the future. But right now the request is for Wheel of Sharp Weapons. So that's where we're gonna go. Okay. So I think we'll end there, unless there's questions. No? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Let's take a moment to dedicate any merit. Recognize that by coming together today, we have created some good merit, some good karma. And so instead of wishing for that for ourselves alone, we dedicate that merit may ripen in other sentient beings, that merit may result in other sentient beings experiencing relief from all suffering, that those who have passed away may quickly achieve perfect human rebirth and meet with Mahayana spiritual friends, that those who are sick may become well, may develop a mind free of distress, that those who have none to pray for them may feel the benefit of our prayers, and that all sentient beings who experience suffering may be free from that suffering, and that we might achieve the state of Buddhahood so that we might lead them to freedom from that suffering. And so I'll offer a few verses of dedication in the Gold Book on page 36, I believe. So we will offer these 2 verses of dedication and then the short long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone online, everyone here.
Thank you, Venerable, teaching. Thank you, everyone online and offline, for joining, and hoping to see all of you tomorrow morning for the Sunday session. Thank you.